introduce each other as we speak. I mean, Terry, do you want to say anything to begin with or not?
Oh yeah, so Yoshua has been a leader in thinking about the impact of AI in society, and we thought that since he's here, we would have a dialogue with some of the other faculty.
Yeah.
And Roger is going to be the moderator. He's going to make sure that people, don't speak too long, but also throw questions at people so that we can move things along. So, okay, so Roger, you could take over.
Okay, well, it was the original panel was I'm at UCSD at the Institute for Neural Computation, run an entity called the Collaboratory, which deals with science in society. Gary Cottrell obviously is at UCSD, and Pat Churchland, who we were hoping to still be around, may come back. But in the interim, is Joshua there?
He's here.
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Yes. Yes, thank you. All right. Hello. I've watched and read a number of things that you've done on this issue of the ethics, and it's the part of it. It's how to get to it and have a sensible impact, because a lot of it you get a little weary after time. The Boston Review today: stop building bad AI. An AI-powered facial assessment tool that compares your face to supposedly objective standards of beauty and offers an aesthetics report with recommendations for cosmetic surgery. Amazon's new Halo health band that aspires to recognize emotions and warns women who wear it when the voice sounds too dismissive or condescending. A tool used by Stanford University research that uses facial recognition technology to predict whether you're gay. Then it goes on, should these technologies exist? And there's a whole article here written by Annette Zimmerman. That's just one of the things. And as you know, the cover of Wired magazine has Timnit Gebru on it. And there's a whole discussion there, although that's mainly about what companies do in terms of AI systems generating racist, unfair results. We know about the facial recognition stuff and so on. There was so we know that there's an issue here, and certainly after an impassioned question by a lady at a speech that you were talk you were giving, you were actually having a debate with Gary Marcus in Montreal. And what you said to her was, I am very concerned that we are building tools that are too powerful for our collective wisdom.
Right.
Basically, right now, it's the Wild West, and we quickly need to get our acts together. And I know, obviously, that you have started this remarkable thing called you did this Montreal Declaration for Responsible Development of Artificial Intelligence. So I wonder, with that little lead in, if you could speak to those points.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. Yeah, if I look back 10 years ago or earlier, I really didn't think that neural nets would have such an impact in the world. I mean, I was hoping for it, but I didn't realize what it would mean for society. And of course, in 2013, I think Terry remembers when there was the battle between Facebook and Google to acquire DeepMind, and then also Jeff's company. Because like a new page was turned where the academic work on neural nets became something with an impact in the world, and it's just grown exponentially since then. So I'm saying obvious things, but why does it matter? Because it means we can't just do our research and close our eyes to how it's going to be used. We have a responsibility, just like the physicist had a responsibility about nuclear war, right? It's a similar thing. Humans build tools. That's the human, a very human characteristic. And so long as those tools were arrows and knives, we could maybe hurt our neighbor, but not destroy millions of people's lives or dignity. But now we can, right? And of course, machine learning is just one of those tools that we can use. All of the sciences are contributing to dangerous tools if we're not careful. And maybe if AI continues to get better, this might be the ultimate weapon, right? And some people, think about existential risk because of that. I don't think this for tomorrow. I'm much more concerned about how tools that are maybe not powerful enough to to take over the power, but in our place, or like to destroy us by their own will, but rather that humans use those tools. Like you don't need a nuclear bomb to be intelligent to destroy the world. You just need a human to press on the button. So the problem is that, as I said, that our political and social infrastructure and norms and institutions have not followed the growth of the power of the tools we're putting into the world. And it's not like I have a solution for this, but we have to try as hard as we can collectively, and especially the people who are designing those tools, to do something about it, to talk to citizens, to voters, that we have to put regulations, we have to put laws, we have to maybe even change our economic system to deal with that new power as it grows. So that was the message. And in the 2017, we started the Montreal Declaration for the responsible development of AI. And what it was about is trying to lay down ethical principles that should govern the deployment and development of AI. And what was original about this work is that it was not just a bunch of academics meeting together. So first of all, there was a bunch of academics, but they were not just AI people. There was a lot of people from the social sciences and humanities. But then also we decided that it was not enough, that we needed to enter in a discussion with the general public. So we conducted consultations and got feedback. And in fact, initially, I think we had 7 principles in our declaration, and it was augmented to 10 through these discussions with people in libraries. But that was only the first step, right? It was just like saying, what is our wish list for the properties we would like to have, the things we would like future AI to be governed by. And the good news is we're starting to see governments turn these kinds of principles into laws. So first of all, after the Montreal Declaration, there's been tens, if not maybe a couple of hundred, it's crazy, of other similar declarations around the world. Different organizations, private, public, governments, international organizations. And that's great. So that means a lot of people have been like talking, we have to do something, we have to do something. What are the kinds of rules we need to put in place and so on. And the latest baby in this trajectory is Europe has put out a proposed bill that is the first of its kind regulation on AI. So you probably know about the GPCR, the regulation on data that they already have put out there. And that extends it in a very nice way to AI. I'm sure it's going to be improved over the years, but it already creates a fairly strong starting point to constrain companies in how they can deploy these kinds of systems. And even like defining what AI is not easy. And so they allow that definition to evolve with time. In any case, I think that that's one aspect of the relationship between society and the kind of technology we're putting out. That is the thing that scares people off, right? I think you mentioned people saying, "Oh, I mean, all of these bad things coming out of AI." But of course, we we also need to talk about the good things and not just talk about them, but build them. So, and I think that here there's also a social and governmental responsibility. So think about the use of AI in areas where governments, where companies are not going because it's not profitable, but it's super important for society, like preventing the next pandemic or trying to mitigate climate change. And there are many, like dozens of projects going on, for example, on the climate change front, and dozens of projects going on the drug discovery front to try to, be ready for the next thing that's going to hit us. So this is happening.
All that report from DeepMind about the about AlphaFold. I mean, that's such
yes, exactly. It's an amazing thing. Absolutely. So we need to do more of that effort, and we need to fund that effort. And it's not all commercially viable. And one example I really like is the discovery of new antibiotics. No pharma is doing any serious work on this because it's not profitable. It's a complicated explanation why it's not. But if we don't find like solutions to this problem, by 2050, the economic cost of that to our health system is going to be $100 trillion US. And there will be 10 million deaths per year. Okay, so this is like serious problems, but industry is not doing it. So that means academia and governments and philanthropy need to kind of get their act together. That's the positive side of AI. I'm trying to say that we need to also collectively enhance these. Otherwise, I mean, if you're a citizen and you only hear about AI being like a dangerous, bad thing, why would we continue? Let's just stop it, right?
Yeah. Terry particularly, whenever I bring these things up with him, immediately has a list of all the excellences that have resulted from all this sort of stuff. Gary, are you there? I can't see from this.
Yes, I am here.
Yes, you are. So what happens with, I'm sorry, I didn't have a thing. What happens with, give the example from UCSD, for example, of this kind of, the kind of thing we've been talking about here. What do you sense? How do you feel about the way in which engineers, say, computational neuroscientists, think in terms of this? Is this something that they're too excited to think about bad consequences, or do you bring that into your teaching?
Yes. The last, maybe it should be the first, but the last lecture I give is on ethics of AI. And I bring up the compass system, which judges have used to decide whether to give somebody bail or remand them to jail before their trial, which can really ruin a family when somebody loses their job because they're in jail. And that system has been used by judges to make sentencing decisions. And it was shown by ProPublica that it's biased against African Americans, which is interesting because the system doesn't take into account the race, but there are lots of features that go with race because African Americans are arrested a lot more frequently. So they have records, and that leads to them being different, treated differently. It's interesting, when I was choosing a thesis topic, I decided to do neural networks because I thought they would never be useful. So the Defense Department could never use any of my work.
Time flies.
Yeah, boy, was I wrong. Yeah, the other thing I try to point out in my class, there are a number of them, but is the need to educate the public about what's possible, because you've got companies. There's this company in Israel that claims that they can tell from your face whether you're a poker player or a terrorist or right. Intelligent or things like that. I mean, my students and I did one of my students did a thesis where he was trying to predict a person's personality from their face. We had a lot of data from the guy at Stanford with their big five personality, and we were able to predict your personality above chance, but it was this much above chance. So, anybody who tells you can decide whether somebody's a poker player by looking at them is, obviously overhyping what they can do. And, and so things like the Compass software, judges, governments, et cetera, don't have any appreciation for, how accurate such systems could be. And that's really worrisome. On the other hand, face recognition systems are pretty accurate, and obviously we all know they're being used in China to oppress Uyghurs, because they can tell often that your ethnicity, and the companies, Kai-Fu Lee, the investor who says China is going to be advancing AI really more quickly than the West because we don't have as many moral restrictions. So that kind of thing really worries me.
So in your talks, Yoshua, have you come across any positive signs in terms of have you been talking to Nick Bostrom and other people? Are there things going on throughout the academic world as well as the business world? Is there any hint in the business world of people understanding this?
Yes. I think everybody is understanding it better, and the level of awareness of these issues has increased tremendously in the last few years. At Mila, there's about 600 grad students, and this was not even a subject of discussion 3 years ago. But now, like if you look on the Slack or look at the invited talks we have, it's a fairly common subject of discussion. I think what Gary mentioned about putting this in our curriculum for training students, even in undergrad, I think, engineers have a training in responsibility and ethics. And I think now computer scientists and engineers who work with AI also need to have that kind of training, but keeping in mind the bad things that can happen that are specific to because we're handling data and so on. So I'm seeing that level of awareness also increasing in industry, sometimes through mishaps, maybe like what happened at Google recently, as you may know. I'm not going to go through the events, but I think that we're going in the right direction. One important thing, though, on which people one important thing on which people disagree, and I have a pretty strong opinion, is whether governments should intervene. And the answer is absolutely, because even though many companies will promote sort of self-regulation, I think this doesn't work. And we've seen it in other areas. Like when the airline industry gets to decide what's right and wrong, we see the problems that have happened. And in general, even for companies, if you think about it, it would be better if there was a level playing field where the rules were clear and the same for everyone. Otherwise, it's just like what you're saying, Gary, about China. If different players, work by different constraints, the least constrained one will kind of win, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. Now, at the international level, which is what you raised, this is a tougher problem, but we also need to face it. We need to face it for AI. We need to face it for climate change. If we don't agree on ways, on ways to coordinate how we're gonna reduce our greenhouse gas impact footprint, we're never going to sort of sort this out. But I think there are solutions. One style of solution I really like for the international scenario is what I call the club solution. So the club solution goes like this. A group of countries, say like EU as a starting example, but can be easily expanded to places like Canada and Australia, Japan. A club of countries say, okay, so here are the rules that we're agreeing on, like in terms of climate, it might be something about climate targets, or in the case of AI, there are some minimal regulations that we all agree on. And if you're part of the club, you agree to those rules, and you also get a benefit, which is free trade or some very strong commercial trade freedom. Right now, our commercial treaties, they are completely disjoint from the politics. But as soon as you join them together, you say, well, if you're part of the group, you get to trade with us. Otherwise, too bad. Well, otherwise, you're going to pay tariffs. That's what people are now planning to do for carbon price, right? If we have a high carbon price here, and then in another country it's free, they can just build all kinds of gadgets there, pollute a lot, and then sell us the gadgets at a much cheaper price than our own companies. So we need to put tariffs that have to do with what was the carbon price in that country where those goods come from. This club principle is based on the idea that we need to tie governance rules that must be global eventually to the goodies that have to do with commerce and movement of people, movement of goods, and all that. And I think that's how we can get out of these prisoners' dilemma. Otherwise, we are stuck in a prisoner's dilemma where the worse actors win and the bad actions win.
Interestingly, the consequences of bad situations like a pandemic, for example, there's lots of good things come out of it. We've all heard about them. There's lots of good things coming out of the technology as well. Eric Topol, I think, has a new book out at the moment about use of technology in healthcare and so on and so forth, which is obviously huge. But what's interesting to me is that it's also provoked discussion amongst disciplines in the academic world, at least.
Yeah.
And one would like to see more of that. There was, in fact, a PNAS paper recently called "Why Science Needs Philosophy," which you would never imagine seeing in a science journal. But there is conversation going on again, and people begin to think about these issues because they have this impacts globally on individuals as well. How do you think about it? What is it? What is a herd? What constitutes a herd?
In the Montreal Declaration, one of the leaders was a philosopher, Marc-Antoine Dillac, a French philosopher who's a professor in Montreal. And I've been talking to philosophers actually for two reasons. One, for the ethical questions we were talking about in the panel, but also for their views on consciousness and all that I kind of touched upon quickly. But they also have interesting things to say. Dan Dennett being a prominent figure in this field. We can't rely on like a single discipline to tell us how to deal with those difficult problems, and especially when it comes to society. I wish that politics was much more scientific, and I think we can do a lot of there's a lot we could make progress on that front to make more rational decisions collectively. This is what I mean. The original meaning of politics is how we govern ourselves together. Okay. And it's become like how we try to cheat each other through cognitive biases of group identity and all that, which is demagogy. But we can also try to come back to the sort of rational meaning of trying to find what works best for the well-being of everyone.
If you let me ask Terry a question though, because you probably want to close now anyway, but you have created the single biggest gathering that really deals with these kind of issues in NeurIPS. What's the agenda there? Have you shifted things? Is your sense of the meeting as it goes forward going to be different along the lines that Yoshua has been talking about, or? You're muted, Terry.
As Yoshua has pointed out, things have been growing exponentially for the last at least 5 years, and it's really hard to keep up. You know, the fact that the world now is following us has really put us into a fishbowl, and we are, you know, as a foundation, trying to do our best on all these areas to try to you know, maintain fairness in terms of first the meeting, and secondly in the technology that is being developed. But more important, we have a leadership role. We had one of the speakers, for example, this was like 3 or 4 years ago, who gave us some advice. He was a keynote speaker, and he said that, I think he was from Yale, maybe Yoshua will remember his name. Yeah, he said that regulations are going to come willy-nilly, whether you like it or not. And when that happens, you want to be at the table, right? In other words, you don't want to have people who don't understand the technology making rules that are counterproductive, that don't really make any sense. And so that's really why it's so important for Yoshua and others to be leading. And let me give you an example from other parts of science. For example, when recombinant DNA technology was developed back in the 60s, I believe, there was a very important meeting because the biologists realized that they now had the power to manipulate genes. I mean, and you know, the power of the gods to create, you know, change the genes, and of course, you know, that could be really destructive and if got in the wrong hands, and also, you know, just not understanding the power that you release on the world. So they had a big meeting at Asilomar where they brought together all the leading molecular geneticists, and I don't know who else that was invited, but one of the things that came out of that was a very rigorous contamination level for doing experiments. Like, you just couldn't do an experiment, you know, lab bench if you're going to manipulate bacterial DNA, because what if you put something in that's bad that spreads? And so they had containment levels, P1, P2 through P4, and that really was very important, because, you know, if you don't have data, if you don't know what you're doing with, you know, you could really cause great destruction to the environment, to your own lives. And I sort of see that beginning to happen now. I see that we are the ones who really should, who understand the technology, and also the biases and the fairness. By the way, a footnote on fairness. So we thought that, great, let's talk to the philosopher about fairness, because, you know, they know what it is, because, you know, right now we're just trying to understand how to change the algorithm to make it fair. And it turns out they can't decide amongst themselves. There's just like, you know, 12 different kinds of fairness, and, you know, how are we going to know which or how are the relevant ones? And you know, it may be unintended consequences. You do something, you don't even know the consequences it's going to have. But that's all to say that it's evolving. It's all evolving very quickly. We are, I think, now that all the regulations are beginning to come out, I think that it's really important that we have scientists at the table, and engineers, and I think meetings, conferences are important. We haven't yet had an Asilomar-like meeting in the field, but I think that might be something we could help organize. What do you think?
Actually, we did. Actually, Terry, before the Montreal Declaration, maybe the only
Yeah,
other
you had a meeting.
similar thing happened at Asilomar, and I was there. I think it was either 2016 or 2017. I'm not sure. And it was driven by like the Future of Life Institute or something like this. So they were initially more worried about existential risk, but they started talking about the societal impact even in a shorter term. That's what I was talking about there. And so there was a list of principles that people kind of agreed on through a collective discussion. It was the beginning of that whole collective discussion. But yeah, we've made a lot of progress since then. And but at this point, I think there's no advantage of like having another list of principles. What we have to do is convince governments to step in, do it carefully, but draft regulation to protect the people. Basically, I mean, all of the examples, Roger, that you gave, they're about protecting people's dignity and human rights. But that's not the only issue. So one aspect we didn't talk about is military problems, where the US is a bad actor. How AI, is being used now in killer drones. So this is something that really threatens the international stability from a military perspective. So there are lots of issues where citizens need to be informed of what is going on so they can have influence on the government.
Well, as you said at that meeting, you said we need to get our act together, because it reminds me that, I mean, this is the centennial year. 1921 was the first performance of a play Karel Čapek wrote in Prague called RUR, which stands for Rossum's Universal Robots. And that was the first time the word robot was used, which means an indentured servant and so on and so forth. But that's 100 years of robots we've had. And today is Aldous Huxley's birthday, or would have been. And so there you are for a brave new world at the same time. So this stuff is moving very, very fast. So we're in it now. I mean, we have to get on it now, as you rightly said. And thank you very much for the talk, by the way.
So there's
back to Gert or Terry.
This is Yoshua, you're raising this military issue, and it's incredibly important. But I don't think it's something that we have any control over. In fact, look what's happening in China, right? I don't think we have any control over that, even if we have principles.
I disagree. So I think that if the international community, like other countries, play the club game that I was talking about, even authoritarian governments eventually will have to choose between having a market for their products and playing by some kind of collective rules at the level of the planet, so we don't destroy it and destroy each other.
But what do you do about China that's so ingrained in our supply chain for chips and all sorts of other devices? I think it'll be hard to wean ourselves from stuff.
I think we're going to build our own industry. Other like democratic countries, because we can't. I think we're going to reach a point where we can't rely too much on China alone. I mean, we need to have other options in case they kind of stop the flow. And I know that governments are already worried about this, and they will invest. So it's similar to what's happened during the pandemic. Like, for example, right now, the Canadian government wants to invest billions of dollars to rekindle their pharma industry, which had disappeared in the last few years. And so when the pandemic started, we couldn't build our own vaccines, where we had like one of the biggest vaccine facilities 30 years ago. It was sold to the private sector. And then the private sector stopped doing that because it was not profitable. And now we realize, like, gee, we would have needed that at home. So there's going to be, I don't know. That seems like the logical thing to do.
And it's a hard problem. That so how do you proctor this? Let's say this club of nations. How do you proctor whether a nation does it or doesn't? use AI for military applications. I mean, it's hard to.
You mean how you monitor these rules?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a place where AI can be used. Depending on what you want to monitor, you can use AI in many ways, like from satellite images or companies. I think like companies, for example, have been reporting financial accounting, but they should be reporting on many more things. One of the things I didn't mention is I think one of the greatest tools for bringing a more socially beneficial behavior from countries and companies is transparency. So we need a lot more transparency in what is going on inside companies, inside governments, and so the rules of the club will include a lot of transparency rules. I mean, that's already where we're going in other, if you look at like nuclear international treaties, there's got to be enough transparency for trust to be relying on something tangible.
And that works for nuclear missiles, but it doesn't quite work for AI, right? I mean,
it
we don't even know where
ransomware. I think that the code of Facebook should be open sourced, and that everyone should be able to check, if there's something not good going on. So there was a start of a discussion on the chat about IP and by Christoph Meyer, I think, and things like this, and ownership of technology. And I think that's another place where governments need to rethink the current system for a lot of reasons that I won't have time to talk about now, but I think there are lots of good reasons to rethink how we are currently organized ownership of inventions and code in particular. So yeah, it's worth at least putting those back on the table.
At least at Facebook Fair, they do give out their code when they get a paper accepted, unlike DeepMind, which is not.
True.
Yeah. But I wanted to bring up something related to Terry's point. I don't know if you remember, Terry, but I think it was back when NeurIPS was still a single track conference. John Kleinberg gave a talk about an analogous thing to the arrow theorems about, he mentioned 3 different criteria you would want for fairness, and they all seemed individually reasonable. And then he showed that no such system could exist that satisfied all 3 criteria. So people will, now what you need to do is decide, well, what aspect of fairness do you want in your system?
Yeah, and in the real world, it's more complicated than these 3 rules anyways.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we need humans there, and it's going to be sector specific and application specific, that human beings like judges and regulators have to say, okay, so for this type of application, these are the things we consider important. I think like mathematizing fairness has its limits. The word is too complicated.
So it's worse. It's worse. So fairness is different in every human culture, right? In fact, okay, with all this discussion about bias in AI, there is no species. There's humans are the most biased creatures in the world. I mean, it's we should clean up our act first if we want to have AI be tell AI that you're not being fair, when humans are even worse. So, I think that we're getting at the bottom of some really difficult issues. I mean, even under the best circumstances or the best intentions, I don't see how things are going to be resolved. I think we're at the bottom, we're just at the very beginning of a very complex issue that has to be discussed. And I think that the first Asilomar was a good place to start, but I think we need to have something else that's a little bit more open, and also brings in other actors that are going to be important, not just the ones that we're familiar with.
Well, we need to do something and do it quickly. Apparently, Facebook's CEO has decided that the social network is now going to become a metaverse company. So the metaverse is the next thing we have to worry about.
What does that mean?
Virtual reality and everything all.
I see. I see.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's coming. Okay, well, we've gone beyond our time limit, but I think we've this has raised a lot of issues. Haven't seen too many answers. I like Yoshua's idea about trade is helping, and certainly nuclear non-proliferation went down that route somehow, and managed. So far, we haven't blown the world up. So I'm hopeful. I think that these are solvable issues. I think that it's going to require, people that are willing to put, a lot of effort in from a lot of countries and a lot of hard work that is going to have to be started now. If we don't start it now, then someone else will take over.
Yeah, but it's going to involve these interdisciplinary things. I mean, the fact that Michael Sandel, a wonderful law professor at Harvard, has just written a new book about meritocracy, and I see one of the questions here was about that. So those things are going to come up again. Those questions of who or what will eventually supervise learning.
Okay. So Joshua, you have the last word. Okay, what's your hope for the world?
Yes, give us a hope.
I'm optimistic by nature, but I think we need to be much more rational in all this and educate each other and be part of the discussion. We can't do our research on our own without thinking about consequences. It's happening. Maybe the question is whether it's happening fast enough, but we have to continue doing the right thing as much as we can.
Amen. Okay, well, thanks, Joshua. It was great to have you here. If not in person, but I think that we've started seeing what we can do. What is it that as a community we can do, and I think that it's a very powerful community right now, and it's growing. And I'm really, and I agree with your optimism. I think that if we make the right decisions now, it will lead to good things up the road. But we have to start that process now. Okay. Well, thanks again, Joshua, and thanks for our panel.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thanks so much, Joshua.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Awesome.